Welcome to Lessons in Leadership. Steve Adubato, Mary Gamba. We're going to kick off this compelling program with our ongoing series, Research, Science, Innovation, and Leadership, done in cooperation with the great folks at Kessler Foundation. Mary, this is exciting. Why don't you introduce our good friend, Rodger?
Oh, I would love it. Rodger DeRose is a great friend, and he is also the president and CEO of the Kessler Foundation. And Rodger, thank you so much for being here. And most importantly, thank you so much for being such a generous and great sponsor to have of Steve Adubato's Lessons in Leadership with co-host me, Mary Gamba.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you. Thank you, Steve.
It's you know what? It's the Lessons in Leadership with Steve and Mary. I don't like the idea that I'm the major player and you're this backup. I don't like that,
I'm
Mary.
going to change our logo immediately following the show, Steve. It'll just be with Steve and Mary.
I agree. And enough about us, Rodger. Listen, Rodger, put in context. We're about to see Olga and Peggy set up who they are. They're great researchers, great scientists, great leaders. Talk about them and set up what we're about to see.
Well, first of all, thank you, Steve and Mary, for having us back on your show and with your viewers. It's terrific to be here and talking about leadership in the type of research that we conduct at Kessler Foundation. And today, you know, your viewers are going to be able to meet Dr. Peggy Chen, one of our senior research scientists, as well as Dr. Olga Boukrina, who is one of our senior scientists as well. And we're just delighted that they are working in one of the major areas, which is the Stroke Center for Rehabilitation Research, Steve and Mary. And I say that because, you know, there's 800,000 strokes a year just in the United States alone. And the types of deficits and functional issues that people with strokes have can be mobility related, they can be cognitive related. And what you're going to hear today from Olga and Peggy is in the area of the work that we do in the field of cognition related to the brain. Olga specializes in the work of brain damage following a stroke, and this has to do with reading deficits. Peggy works in the area of spatial neglect, so that when one side of the brain is damaged in a stroke, that there becomes this field of spatial neglect is what it's called, where the GPS system of the brain is not actually picking up all elements of space. And through the research that Peggy's doing, we, through 10 sessions, 10 one-hour sessions, we can help individuals regain that lost function that they had from the stroke. So this is a very exciting area, and it's so meaningful, Steve and Mary, because we implement this by going right into the practice at Kessler Institute, and we go around the world with our research and share it so that these can be used in clinical practices, which is so important.
Rodger, before I let you go and before we move into this segment with Olga and Peggy, the website has been up the entire time for Kessler Foundation. No money, no mission. And we are not shy about saying, listen, we want to support the work of the foundation. So if people want to contribute and or find out more, tell folks when they go on that website how they can give to the research being done, please.
Yeah, please have them come to kesslerfoundation.org, and they can learn more about our foundation and the mission. But, you know, their funding is really what helps us collect the early data that we need in order to then apply for some of the major grants at the National Institutes of Health, the Department of Defense, and other agencies. And it's so important, Steve. And our scientists, we are so lucky to have world-class scientists right here in New Jersey that are competing on the world stage at NIH, Department of Defense, and other agencies, and able to win many of those very, very significant grants. But we can't do it without donor support that comes from your viewers, Steve.
Well said. So we're about to meet two extraordinary researchers, scientists at Kessler Foundation. I want to thank Rodger, the folks at the foundation, for this partnership on research, innovation, science, and leadership. It is all about leadership. We'll have Rodger on again in the future, because Rodger and I have so many offline conversations about leadership that are not really research or science related. It's just like, wow, isn't it hard being a leader, and also very gratifying. Rodger,
Exactly.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Mary. Great to be with you.
You got it. Stay with us. You can check out some good stuff right now. We talked about them before, and we are honored to have them with us on Lessons in Leadership. Dr. Peggy Chen is Senior Research Scientist and Intellectual Property Liaison, Kessler Foundation, and Research Associate Professor of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation, Rutgers, New Jersey School of Medicine. Dr. Olga Boukrina. Olga, I got that right?
You did.
Olga Boukrina is, in fact, a research scientist, Center for Stroke Rehabilitation Research at Kessler Foundation. It's great to have you both with us on Lessons in Leadership. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
You know, Rodger set this up talking about exactly what the work you're doing, the research you're doing, and why it matters. And we just finished a seminar series, both of you together, that we led with a group of great scientists at Kessler Foundation. Peggy, let me ask you, you're a scientist and a researcher, but have you always seen yourself as a leader?
That's a big question. And I see myself as a leader now. Probably 20 years ago, I probably did not see myself as a leader. I was just started in my career. I was a student and learning how to do research. And slowly I built my own research lines and I've become more confident leading the field as I grow.
Olga, again, the series Research, Science, Innovation, and Leadership. Born leader on your end, or a leader that has grown into who you are today?
I think I'll echo Peggy in saying that it's a work in progress. And it's always, you learn something, you acquire some new skills. But as scientists, I think we have to be able to lead and to take people on this journey that describes our ideas, where they come from, where they lead. So you have to be able to learn this important skill.
And in terms of being a leader in the area of research, Olga, talk specifically about the research you're doing and the impact it's having.
So I study people who have a stroke in the left side of their brain. That often leads to problems with language and reading. And these people often have problems in multiple domains of language. And also in terms of their brain, the cerebral blood flow and brain activity in their brain is reduced on that side of the brain where they had the stroke. And what we're doing is studying what happens when people first have a stroke and what occurs when they have recovery, full or incomplete recovery. And then we're also trying to develop new tools that will target their specific areas where they need help, and also target brain processes. We're trying to help these people to improve their function after stroke.
Yeah. And before Mary jumps back in, let me ask you, Peggy, spatial neglect, define it and help us understand it.
This disorder called spatial neglect is a symptom, a deficit, because of people's function of attention was damaged after brain injury. And the population that I'm working with, their brain injury is mostly caused by stroke. And spatial neglect, why it is called neglect is because after the brain injury, they lost the ability to pay attention to space. And that space is has particularly important to our body and environment relationship. So it's not like they cannot see or perceive things around them. It's they're not paying attention to the space that's actually opposite to their brain injury.
Complex and important stuff. Mary, jump in.
Yeah, definitely. Olga, can you talk a little bit? We often talk about no money, no mission, and I've said it on this series so many times. And at the Kessler Foundation, obviously, in order to do the research and the things that you do to truly impact people's lives, for the viewers that are watching today, what is needed? What does the Kessler Foundation need in order to continue to move forward on these very important studies and treatments for people?
So we can create the novel solutions and we can come up with the creative ideas, but without the leadership from the community, none of this work would be able to proceed. So it would just remain ideas on paper. We do need our volunteers that are part of our research and our sponsors that make this research possible. And there's many projects that only became possible after someone stepped up to the leadership role and said, I want to make this possible. I believe in this project.
It's funny, you talk about leadership. We're also talking about this, fundraising, development. Peggy, talk about that. I asked you if you saw yourself as a leader. Do you see yourself, I don't want to say as a fundraiser, but Rodger and I were actually just having, Rodger DeRose and I were just having an offline conversation about this. Every researcher and scientist tied to Kessler Foundation, if you are not good at bringing in grants, bringing in dollars, that's what Mary means, no money, no mission. Peggy, have you always seen yourself as someone who has to convince others to sign on board and say, yes, we're going to support this financially? Peggy.
Yes, that's a huge part of our jobs. And so we do two different approaches. One is more conventional way, like most research universities, we submit grants either to the federal government, to state government to help us continue our research or create new, initiate new research projects. We also work with our local communities, like a private foundation or certain families if they're interested in our research. And during this process, we're not, I don't see myself as a fundraiser, but I work with the people in the foundation who are really good at fundraising.
Yeah, with Michelle Pignatello and that
exactly.
team, right?
So what Olga and I, we can do is to communicate with the community organizations and help them understand why our project is not just helping people they don't know, but also themselves and their families, why it is important, why it can really improve everybody's quality of life. So, and that is a big component.
Sorry, Mary.
Yeah, no, and Olga, you know, with the pandemic, we're almost 2 years into this. We're taping this now in November of 2021. It'll be aired in January and repeated. What was the biggest challenge that you faced? I mean, for many of us, we were able to be at home and work from home. But for medical professionals and others advancing research, what was the biggest challenge that you faced in your field, given the pandemic?
Yes, so we, as the foundation, we worked from home for several months in 2020. And that meant that we couldn't recruit patients into our research because at the time, a lot of our research was conducted in person. So that was a big challenge that a lot of the work had to be put on hold. On the other hand, it also gave us an opportunity to catch up on some other things, such as, writing up the results of the findings that we already we've already analyzed and completed, and publishing it, that work, so that people can read it, and also give us the opportunity to think in new ways about conducting our research and thinking about making it more mobile and more versatile in terms of taking it to platforms such as Zoom. So I think Peggy has a study that's running online.
Talk about
yes,
that, Peggy.
And Olga really touched on a very good point. So the challenge actually help us innovate, help us create new ways to conduct study. And actually, for me, I started new research lines using mobile devices. I'm using virtual reality, augmented reality devices that's using Wi-Fi connection. So we're developing treatment studies that eventually, hopefully in the next few years, can be used at patients' homes. So all these are triggered by, I would not say it's triggered by the pandemic, but the pandemic situation actually accelerate the development of using mobile devices to create new treatments and eventually in the future, hopefully to improve home-based services.
What a great example of innovation and its connection. That is leadership. That's leading in your field. That's leading and making a difference in people's lives and quality of life. This is a question I've been wanting to ask both of you because we work together in the seminar series, and I learned so much about you and your colleagues, and we were blessed to be able to do it in person, which was great. But Peggy and Olga, I want to ask both of you, in science, when I think science, I think also math in this sense, because I struggled in math. I was a qualitative person in my research, mostly because quantitatively I was terrible. In math, 2 + 2 always equals 4. Science, 2 + 2 equals 4. In leadership, Olga, 2 + 2 doesn't always equal 4. What I mean by that is leadership is a science of sorts, but it's also an art form. Is that challenging, or how is that challenging for someone who is trained in the field of science to realize that leadership isn't so neat and clean. And I'm not saying science is, but it's an art. Is that complex for you?
I agree with that statement, Steve, that in science, oftentimes the large breakthroughs, the kind of the innovative ideas, they come not from a single head, but from people putting many heads together and bringing their expertise to the table. So, you know, someone that's good at math and statistics and complex analysis and you know, machine learning can bring this expertise to the table. And then somebody who's more creatively assessing the situation and the problem at hand can put that to the table as well. And so together they give birth to something that's more creative and bigger than any one of them individually could have created. So nowadays the emphasis is on teams, and you know, Peggy and I have a good example where we actually bring our interests together in many projects and collaborate and create new ideas and studies.
Yeah. Peggy, real quick, leadership as a combination of science and art, you say?
It definitely is art. Even science is kind of an art, like how to answer questions, like to find a solution, to answer scientific questions. I would say it's art form, and leadership definitely, because we're working with people. When there's people, there's dynamics, and there's, I would say, not all there's no one style of leadership that can work in all situations, in all kinds of like different teams. And in our setting, we're a hybrid of corporate culture and science culture. So we learn these so-called soft skills, you know, while we're in the position. So I think both of us are learning how to work with our teams and lead our team. And actually, we also educate new scientists all the time. So it's really a great opportunity for us.
As soon as you bring the human element into it, it isn't so black and white, 2 and 2 never equals simply 4. Olga and Peggy, it is not just an honor to have you on with us on Lessons in Leadership and be part of the Research, Science, Innovation, and Leadership series that made possible through our partnership with Kessler Foundation, but it's been an honor to work with both of you in the classroom setting, and I look forward to continuing to learning from each other. Thank you, Peggy. Thank you, Olga.
Thank you, Steve and Mary.
Our pleasure. We'll be right back right after this. This edition of Lessons in Leadership is made possible by the BUCCINO Leadership Institute at Seton Hall University, Prager Metis, Valley Bank, the International Union of Operating Engineers, Local 825, the North Ward Center, the New Jersey Sharing Network, Delta Dental of New Jersey, Kessler Foundation, and Seton Hall University, showing the world what great minds can do since 1856.
This is Mary Gamba. If you want more leadership tips and tools, log on to stand-deliver.com.
Promotional support for this edition of Lessons in Leadership with me, Steve Adubato, and my colleague, Mary Gamba, has been provided by NJ.com, NJBIA, and New Jersey Business Magazine, CIANJ, and Commerce Magazine. We are honored to be joined by Warwick Fairfax, who is founder of Crucible Leadership. Warwick comes to us from our good friends at the BUCCINO Leadership Institute at Seton Hall University, our partners there. This book, Crucible Leadership, we'll put it up there, we'll tell you about it, but I have to tell you, in reading it, compelling, fascinating, raw, candid, vulnerable, all of it. First of all, it is an honor, Mr. Fairfax, to have you join us.
Well, thanks so much, Steve, and thanks, Mary. It's wonderful to be here.
The premise of the book talks about being resilient, coming back from a very public I don't like to use the word failure, if you will, that you talk about, a $2.25 billion family-owned business, 150 years old. You take it over at what age?
It's hard to believe I was 27 when this happened.
Take a look. I'm looking at you. You're 27, you said?
Yeah.
And describe the different platforms and the how you get to a $2.25 billion empire. What's in there?
Well, yeah, thanks, Steve. So I grew up in this 150-year-old family media business. It had the Australian equivalent of the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, massive company, 4,000 employees, 700 million in revenue. It was massive. So yeah, fresh out of Harvard Business School. My dad died earlier in '87 when this happened. And I felt the company wasn't being run along the ideals of the founder or wasn't being managed well. Whether that's true or not, in my youthful naivety and idealism, I went in there with this crusader mentality, and I inherited some shares, so that made it possible. So I launched this $2.25 billion takeover, which, you know, I was full of idealism, but it basically failed spectacularly for a variety of reasons. So it was just, you know, sort of young man, a lot of idealism, but, you know, just a cataclysmic failure on sort of an epic scale.
On the spirit of lessons in leadership, all about, if you will send you a copy of my book, Lessons in Leadership, because it's filled with my mistakes and failures of every level. Lessons that we learn from them. One significant lesson you learned from that experience that everyone can appreciate would be? Go ahead.
You know, it might not be what you would expect. It felt a bit like growing up in the royal family, like Prince William or even, you know, Prince Harry, who's had a pretty tough time. So I had inherited this whole mantle, if you will. So I went to Oxford, like some of my relatives, worked on Wall Street, went to Harvard Business School. I got my MBA. So really, I was trying to live somebody else's life, some you know, media mogul, if you will, but at heart, I'm more of a reserved, reflective advisor. So the biggest mistake I made, which were many, but the biggest was I was trying to be somebody else. You know, bad things happen when you try to live somebody else's life, even if it's a noble legacy. You know, we were respected by the community. We were seen as producing independent newspapers. There was a lot to admire about the vision of the company, but as good a vision as it wasn't my vision. I was living somebody else's life.
Yeah. Mary.
Yeah, and you talk a lot in the book about a path to significance. Can you share what that means? That resonated with me, and I'm confident our viewers it will resonate with them as well.
Yeah, I mean, I define a life of significance as a life on purpose dedicated to serving others. So it's sort of my premise that everybody wants to be joyful and fulfilled. Well, given the way humans are wired, which we can't do a whole lot about, if you focus on some narcissistic, it's all about me and wealth and money, and this is not so much a value judgment, it's about, you know, we can't do much about being human. It doesn't lead to being fulfilled. You could talk to any psychologist, they'll tell you narcissism and just focusing on self is not the way. And so for me, you know, a life, especially out of the ashes of a crucible, that will give you joy and fulfillment is to try to find pain in the purpose, to use that aphorism, try to find a way to give back. So when you focus on others, you know, you can be successful and joyful and fulfilled if you're really focused on somehow giving back. And it sounds idealistic, but in your own way, be it big or small, making the world a better place.
The title. Make it resonate for everyone watching right now. Crucible Leadership. Talk about it.
So yeah, Steve, so really a crucible is a gut-wrenching, painful experience. It could be your fault or not your fault. So we have our own podcast, Beyond the Crucible. We've interviewed 70 plus guests, everybody from every gender, race, background. People have become quadriplegics, people have been abused, people have lost businesses. All of those are just traumatic experiences. And so a crucible is such that you're never the same after you go through a crucible. And so really, crucible leadership comes from when you go through a crucible, you have a choice. You can say this was unfair, or what I did was just awful, and hide under the covers for the next 30, 40 years or 50 years. Eventually it will end. Or you can say this was awful, it wasn't fair, but how do I use my pain to help others? Right. Exactly. It starts with the inside. You've got to deal with that. But so a crucible, it's often, the worst day in your life, but how do you bounce back from that? And that's really the key. And you could lead on a massive level or just in your neighborhood or community. It's really, it's a choice. It's that defining moment. Are you going to let it defeat you and destroy you, or are you going to try to bounce back stronger?
By the way, as we put up the BUCCINO Leadership Institute, Seton Hall University, you have in fact written for In the Lead, which we've contributed to as well, which is a leadership publication put out by BUCCINO Leadership Institute. You've been on with Brian Price, our great friend, the director up there at the Institute, on their podcast. But real quick, crucible moment. Mary and I have talked about this before. I didn't know Mary when I lost my seat in the state legislature in New Jersey at 27. You lost a few bucks at 27.
Yeah.
I lost what I thought was my lifelong dream to be governor and God knows what at 27. And I remember thinking, this is unfair. I was better. And someone said to me, a very close friend, God rest his soul, hey, you want to complain about the election, saying it was unfair, or do you want to figure out how you can make a difference in another arena? And that's why we're actually here today. That's the rest of the story all these years later. Mary, I'll give you another shot. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much. So 1 minute or less, if you had some advice to give to our young adults, say at Seton Hall at the BUCCINO Leadership Institute, in terms of resilience that you were talking about, can you share a tip or tool on how to truly be resilient and bounce back?
I'd say your worst day doesn't define you. Probably the most important thing is, yes, you need friends that will help you, but you've got to dig down deep into your values and beliefs. It could be a religion, philosophy, but when life is at its toughest, dig down deep in what is it I believe in. And just say to yourself, I refuse to be defined by what happened. I will find a purpose in this. We've had people on our podcast that have a woman that became a quadriplegic at age 12 and a diving accident in a pool. She says what she went through is a gift. I don't pretend to understand that, but if you can somehow find some sense of purpose in your worst moment, that does give you resilience to get through often what's unthinkable. So dig deep within is probably the first step.
And by the way, this book is filled with stories of people who have been incredibly resilient as they face their crucible moment. I want to remind folks, go on to our website, stand-deliver.com, to look at, I've said it many times, Mary, look at our interview with the great Eric LeGrand, paralyzed in a football game playing for Rutgers back in 2010. He chose to say, I'm going to make a difference. And that's what he's doing today in his crucible moment. Rorik, I want to thank you so much for joining us. You honor us by being with us. We appreciate our friends at Seton Hall University and the BUCCINO Leadership Institute, because one of the great things about the partnership is they connect us to people we otherwise might not know. Hey, all the best to you and your family.
Thanks so much, Steve. Thanks to Mary. Thanks for having me.
I'm Steve Adubato. That's Mary. And this has been Lessons in Leadership. And we'll see you next time. This edition of Lessons in Leadership is made possible by the BUCCINO Leadership Institute at Seton Hall University, Prager Metis, Valley Bank, the International Union of Operating Engineers, Local 825, the North Ward Center, the New Jersey Sharing Network, Delta Dental of New Jersey, Kessler Foundation, and Seton Hall University, showing the world what great minds can do since 1856.
This is Mary Gamba. If you want more leadership tips and tools, log on to stand-deliver.com.
Promotional support for this edition of Lessons in Leadership with me, Steve Adubato, and my colleague, Mary Gamba, has been provided by NJ.com, NJBIA, and New Jersey Business Magazine, CIANJ, and Commerce Magazine.